Hi, I'm Catherine Maggs, and today I want to talk about boundaries. What are they? Why do we need them? And how do we set them? And I guess I'm talking about boundaries today for a couple of reasons. One, boundaries are still something that I'm working through myself. They have always been something that I've struggled with but not realized because I didn't know the importance of them or even what they were. But they're becoming more and more important. We're living in this place where work as we knew it and home as we knew it have just collided and smashed into a million pieces, just like a completed jigsaw that's fallen to the floor. And we scraped up all the pieces and we're trying to work out how to fit this all back together again in a way that is healthy for ourselves, our work relationships, and our home relationships. And it's challenging, to say the least. But I think part of the challenge is we don't really understand what boundaries are. We have boundaries, we have expectations, we have rules. And if I think through my own experiences, I grew up in a family where boundaries weren't role modeled. They certainly weren't taught or spoken about, and they probably really didn't exist. We certainly had a lot of expectations and rules within our family, and I think that's how the family structure worked. You may have heard the quote, the term, expectations are the thief of joy. When we think about what expectations are, they essentially are a set of beliefs that we put on situations or people. We enter a situation or we engage with people expecting them to behave in a certain way or for something to work out in a certain way. And if you think about it, if we approach situations with that intent, those expectations that we have, we're really setting ourselves up for failure before we even start. Because everyone comes to that situation with their own personal expectations based on their beliefs and their experiences and their perceptions of how things should be. And then we have rules. Now, rules are much clearer. They're a set, defined, usually documented or communicated way of conduct. And we may not always agree with the rules, but we understand them. We understand what is expected of us in those situations where those rules apply. And then we have boundaries. So when you look at the psychological definition of boundaries, it's the limits that we set with other people. That definition alone makes you think, well, isn't that kind of a set of expectations? What I'm starting to work out and understand is that boundaries relate specifically to each of us as individuals. They are the limits that we need personally to meet our needs and define our worth and self-esteem to keep us healthy individually. So the boundaries I need and set are the limits that I need to ensure that I can be the best possible person I can be, so that when I'm interacting with you, I'm also the best possible person for you. So there's lots of little examples I can give you, but before I do, I want to talk about how Glennon Doyle explains identifying boundaries in her book Untamed. She talks about that if there is a behavior in somebody else that is triggering anger or frustration in you, then most likely they've crossed a boundary. And I love that because it's such a simple concept. And you think about anything in your life where you have felt anger or frustration at something somebody else has done. And you think back to that, they have done something that potentially is a boundary or a belief that they've crossed. So you've got the power then to look at that and determine, is that a boundary I want to keep? Where did that boundary come from? And is it important to me now? So, for example, you might get phone calls after hours for work and it frustrates you, and they're not important things, they're things that could wait. And it angers you and it frustrates you, and you take the calls anyway, and it just keeps happening and happening and happening. But you've never set the boundary. If you had communicated to your team that I'm happy to take calls outside of hours in this particular context only, outside of that, it can wait till morning. You need to set and communicate those boundaries to keep your needs and sense of worth balanced. Because when we don't set clear boundaries and when we don't communicate boundaries, we end up being depleted. We feel like we're being taken advantage of. And these aren't healthy state of being. The other really key thing to understand is, what are the different type of boundaries? Obviously, there are physical boundaries that protect our personal space. There are sexual boundaries that also protect us. And they're the obvious ones. But we need to educate ourselves on all the different aspects of boundaries. We have time boundaries that protect our use and misuse of time. So what are the things that are really important to us? Make time for them and don't overcommit our time. Emotional boundaries that protect our well-being and our feelings. And our energy, more importantly. Learning to say no to going out with our friends when we know what we really need is a night at home with a hot bath and a good book. Our intellectual boundaries, and that refers to our thoughts and our ideas and respecting the ideas of others. And we have material boundaries as well, which obviously protect our physical belongings. So boundaries may seem complex, but I think first we have to educate ourselves on exactly what they are. And then we have to start listening to our triggers to understand, what are our personal boundaries and what is it that we need to ensure that our personal needs are met and our self-worth is maintained. I hope you found this useful. Take care.